Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I personally found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, once again, about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And this is going to be a video by Mr. Boxing Ego that I personally found very particularly interesting. And I've already stated this on Boxing Ego. I don't think that he necessarily is a bad analyzer. I think that he has a certain amount of good points in his videos. I think that he knows his stuff about boxing, but just like a lot of these other LDBC and new media channels, and really just boxing channels and sports channels in general, because the majority of them are super fans of certain fighters or certain athletes or certain teams, you will see their bias show through. And one of those fighters, in my opinion, clearly is Mr. Canelo Alvarez. It just is what it is. He does not like him. I think it's very clear why. Because the LDBC and new media, their whole objective basically is to make sure that certain fighters like Canelo Alvarez, that they're not usually ranked at the number one pound for pound spot, or to make you believe that they're a little bit more overhyped and that they're a little bit more smoke and mirrors than what they are reality. And I get it to a degree, because if you're from their position, a lot of black fighters, of course, has been, they have been somewhat knocked, and they have overall been somewhat, I really don't know the word for it, I guess, but they overall have been somewhat degraded in favor of certain fighters, maybe like that of the Canelo Alvarez look, or like that of the Vasily Lomachenko look, or the Tyson Fury look. Listen, I understand, but once again, you need to have a certain level of objective and logical commentary to really see the difference between someone that, like I said, is a Tommy Morrison and someone who really is a reality of a great white hype or someone of that nature, and someone who is a real deal fighter, someone who is a great fighter. And Canelo Alvarez not only is a great fighter, he's an all-time great fighter. I've already told my opinions on Canelo Alvarez a multitude of times. And when it comes to other Latin fighters or other Latino fighters or just even other fighters in general, a lot of these channels, they always try to degrade him and say he's not really that, all-time great. He's not even above that of Eric Morales, or all this other stupid bullshit. Not only is Canelo Alvarez on the level of Eric Morales and some of these other all-time great Mexican fighters or Latin fighters or just other fighters in general, he's above them. He's above them in terms of greatness. It is what it is. You can like that, you can not like that, but that's just how it is. Canelo Alvarez is above the Eric Moraleses of the world. He is above the Marco Antonio Barreras. He is above that overall, more than likely, of the Juan Manuel Marquezes, who lost several fights in his career. Okay? Not just to Manny Pacquiao, but to Timothy Bradley and a couple of other fights in his career as well. Okay? Yes, Canelo Alvarez is greater than those fighters. He is also greater than certain fighters like that of a Miguel Cotto, overall of a Sugar Shane Mosley. He is also greater than that of an Oscar De La Hoya. Not everyone is going to agree with that, but it just is what it is. When you talk about all around skill and all around dominance and what they've accomplished in their career, Canelo Alvarez is going to beat them in most categories, period, point blank. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's not really mainly what the conversation is about. But I thought that I would bring that up because I always get these guys in my comment section who very clearly have a certain opinion about Canelo Alvarez, and they take a look at my channel and they say, oh, you just sound like another Canelo Alvarez lover. You just sound like another Canelolita or anything like that. And listen, dude, I've already explained this a multitude of times. Whether you personally believe my opinion or whether you think that, my intentions are logical and objective, that's up to you. I can't really change your opinion unless you personally overall change it yourself. But at the end of the day, what my objective is to put out the most logical and objective commentary and interesting commentary that I can, period, point blank. And one thing that I know about Canelo Alvarez, that is the factual truth, is that people can say whatever they want. But when I take a look at the man's resume, the man has more than probably 10 A-grade fighters in his career. And how many top 10 pound for pound fighters can truly say that? That's why when Canelo Alvarez was ranked as the number one pound for pound fighter, I had to acquiesce because, and listen, this is coming from a guy that many, many years ago, or at least years ago, actually probably not too long ago, probably about 6 years ago, around the time when Canelo was fighting Gennady Golovkin for the first time, I used to hate Canelo Alvarez's guts. I used to think that he was the most overrated fighter on the planet. I used to think overall that he was going to lose to Gennady Golovkin. I personally had thought that Maybe he had lost the Sonny Lara fight. I thought all these things. And certain people would debate maybe that he still had lost the Sonny Lara fight. That's up to you. I think that that fight was very decently competitive. But after becoming in more of a logical phase, the truth is about Canelo Alvarez, and the truth that I eventually had to accept was that Canelo Alvarez was not only a great fighter, he was an all-time great fighter. You don't beat fighters like Miguel Cotto, like Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, even though he was a bit more wore down, that is true. You don't beat certain fighters like Danny Jacobs, Gennady Golovkin, Araceli Lara, Austin Trout, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith. You don't beat fighters like these repeatedly, basically on a circle, if you're just the complete most overrated fighter on the planet. That doesn't end up happening. So what I eventually had to realize about Canelo Alvarez is pretty much what a lot of these people realized about Canelo Alvarez, and that's why a lot of them do so many videos about him and try to tear him down on a daily basis, because they know that Canelo Alvarez is still the main threat to the number one pound for pound spot, and that if he does defeat Dimitri Bivol in the rematch, that he's going to be right there. Now, in my opinion, do I believe that he's going to defeat Dimitri Bivol in a rematch? More than likely not. I just think that Dimitri Bivol, I think that he's too big. I think that he's too skilled. And when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, the man is about 5'9" with a 70 to 71 inch reach. Dimitri Bivol, I believe, is about 5'10" to 5'11", if not even a little bit bigger. He's very powerful. He's very strong. He's used to fighting guys that are even a little bit naturally bigger than him. I think that he can handle Canelo Alvarez's size. The question will be, is that can Canelo Alvarez overall come up, and can he present a better strategy in the rematch? But either way, not to really talk about that too much here and there, but my main point being is this. I get a certain amount of these guys in my comment section, and they basically say, oh, you just sound like another Canelo lover. Overall, he hasn't fought this guy, and he hasn't fought this guy. And it's understandable that certain fights have not happened. What you can say about Canelo is that certain fights have failed yet to present themselves, or I'm not going to say present themselves, but that they have failed to happen overall. Now, Jamal Charlo, you could possibly blame that on Jamal Charlo, because I believe at one point in time he was offered a contract, and he may have turned that specific contract down. Now, you can blame Canelo a little bit for the Demetrius Andrade fight not happening, and you can also blame him for the David Benavidez fight not happening. Personally, in my opinion, I think eventually he's going to face Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez. He's expressed that somewhat in the past, that more than likely he probably will face them, just not at the current moment. And I think that at the time that he's pretty much testing the waters at the light heavyweight division. And certain people always say, oh, he's not planning to fight Dimitri Bivol. He's not planning to fight any of these guys. He's just going to keep fighting bums and blah, 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 blah. Well, I have to ask this question for those of the people overall that comment in my comment section and say that. When has Canelo Alvarez really ever not fought someone that is of decent competition at least every other year? Because Canelo Alvarez, for his whole career ever since that I've been watching him, if it was not Araceli Lara one year, and if he did not really fight anyone the next, then eventually it was Gennady Golovkin. Then eventually it was Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders or Callum Smith. And certain people may not count those guys as A-grade fighters, but I count them as A-grade fighters. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that Billy Joe Saunders versus Demetrius Andrade was allegedly one of the biggest fights in boxing when that fight was about to be announced, and was going to be the biggest win of Andrade's career had he been able to beat Billy Joe Saunders when that fight was about to happen. But all of a sudden, when Canelo Alvarez faces him, apparently he's just some weak European bum. Apparently he's just some weak European white boy. Because the truth is that had Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo, had they beaten someone overall like that of a Callum Smith or a Billy Joe Saunders or a Caleb Plant, someone who was, sure, overall, I'm not going to say A plus necessarily, but at least on the A minus, maybe A level, up to you. But clearly fighters of decent pedigree. Had Andrade or Jamal Charlo beat one of those fighters, these same channels that would be claiming that they're weak European white boys, they would be claiming that those guys are A-grade fighters. And overall, that would be the biggest win of these guys' careers. Because to be quite honest with you, if Andrade or Charlo, had they overall been able to beat someone like a Callum Smith or a Billy Joe Saunders by now, it very clearly would be the biggest win of their career. No doubt about it. Or at least debatably overall, certainly for Demetrius Andrade. But even debatably for Charlo, who has that one very good win over Julian J. Rock Williams. But it is what it is. Anyways, not to digress too much. But of course, Canelo Alvarez in his next fight, he apparently is going to face that of a John Ryder. Mr. Boxing Ego believes that a different fight should occur, and I certainly do get his points. In my opinion, like I said, I don't think Ego is a bad analyst, but a lot of his bias, especially with certain fighters, depending on whether he likes them or not, it will show through. It is what it is. In my opinion, I don't think that the John Ryder fight is very good either. I don't think that it's a fight that really overall is that great, but like I said, I believe that there's a reason for this. I believe that there's a rhyme and a reason, and my opinion, just me personally, I think that Canelo Alvarez is trying to get back in his groove, and I think that after this fight, more than likely, he's going to try and fight Dimitri Bivol in the rematch. Now, certain people, of course, will say, oh, he's not going to do that overall. He's going to avoid the Dimitri Bivol rematch. Well, please let me know overall what facts you have about this situation and why you personally believe that. Because what Canelo Alvarez has shown me in the past overall is that, sure, there were certain rematches that did not happen, like the Arasani Lara fight. But the difference between that is that Canelo Alvarez won that fight. When it came to the draw with Gennady Golovkin, he had to rematch him, and he basically overall did grant him a rematch, so it is what it is. All right? So, once again, we'll see what ends up happening with this. We'll see who's right and wrong. I personally believe that Canelo is preparing for that of the Dimitri Bivol rematch. I think he knows that he's going to have to defeat the man that defeated him not too long ago in order to possibly regain his number one pound-for-pound spot. That's just me personally. That's what I personally believe. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what Mr. Ego overall says in this video. But he personally believes that Canelo Alvarez should not be fighting John Ryder next, but possibly should set up a fight with that of Anthony Yarde, who, of course, recently got knocked out by that of Artur Beterbiev when it came down to it. And I do understand, the logic a little bit behind that. But let's see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say. Let's get into it.
Canelo Alvarez, John Ryder, I got a better option. That's what I want to talk about in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more Boxing Ego quick hits. Less intro, less filler, let's get it. Now, I got to get back to doing this consistently, the Ego thoughts, where I just break down random topics. It doesn't have to be something that's been reported, but my own thoughts. Canelo Alvarez. There's rumors, at least as of me recording this video, that Canelo may fight John Ryder in the UK or Mexico. I think the fight is buns. Not a fan, don't want to see it. Thought John Ryder was robbed versus Caleb Smith, but then I thought he lost to Danny Jacobs. So,
isn't that interesting once again? Now, Ego can have his own opinion. But isn't that very interesting that certain people, they always come in my comment section and they're like, oh, you just don't want to hear the truth from Mr. Boxing Ego. You say that he's biased and all sorts of shit. No, Ego very clearly is biased at times. Isn't it very interesting that all these channels, like that of Ego or Dante's Boxing Nation, they don't have a problem with Deontay Wilder getting a draw over Tyson Fury in the first fight, even though very clearly it was a bad decision, or Brian Castano probably deserving the win in the first fight against Jermell Charlo, but they're like, oh, we could see how it scored a draw, or, I thought Jermell Charlo won. Isn't that particularly interesting? But when it comes to Lomachenko versus Jermaine Ortiz, apparently the fighter got robbed. When it comes to Teofimo Lopez versus Sandor Martin, apparently the fighter got robbed. When it comes to Canelo Alvarez versus Lara or someone else, apparently the fighter got robbed. Isn't it interesting how whenever it comes to a fighter that they are trying to break down or that they're trying to basically dismantle from the top, isn't that particularly interesting how they always allegedly rob those other fighters? Isn't that particularly interesting?
What's the point? What is the point of that fight? Like, it really means nothing. And I know the Canelo Chupapi...
Well, what it means is that basically Canelo Alvarez will have to get back in the groove of things, and that he's going to have a couple of tune-ups. I think that the Gennady Golovkin fight was meant for a couple of different reasons, and that this fight basically not only is to defend a mandatory, if he does end up taking the fight, but on top of that, it's also to get in the groove of things. But what I will say is this, is that Canelo Alvarez is going to have to face someone elite after this John Ryder fight. He cannot get away with fighting another guy that clearly is not going to be in his class. So Canelo Alvarez is going to have to step up in competition after this fight, whether he likes it or not. But like I said, what Canelo has shown me in the past is that usually he is going to step up to the plate. And I cannot say that about certain other fighters. Once again, this is the same channel in Boxing Ego who loves to praise Gervonta Tank Davis for facing fighters that really have no particular chance over him in every single fight.
Muñeños.
Now, some people may say, well, just because Boxing Ego does that, does that mean that you have to stick up for Canelo Alvarez? Absolutely not. If Canelo Alvarez overall, once again, if he fights a fighter once again that I believe is clearly not in the same class or nowhere near, if I think that that fighter doesn't even have a 3-1 or a 5-1 chance when it comes down to it, then of course I think it's a very poor fight. Once again, I don't have any allegiances. All my opinions are based off of what I think is the most logical and objective breakdown possible. But the thing is with me is that when Canelo Alvarez fought Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, and Caleb Plant, you can say whatever you want to about them. All those guys were champions. They were legitimate champions. Gervonta Tank Davis to this day has yet to win a legitimate belt at 135 pounds. He has yet to face Vasily Lomachenko. He has yet to face Shakur Stevenson. He has yet to face overall Devin Haney. He has yet to face any of those guys, period, point blank. The guys instead that he's more focused on fighting is Hector Garcia and Isaac Pitbull Cruz, people who have never won a belt before. If they have won a belt, they're very clearly not elite champions, period. Just is what it is, period. So people can criticize Canelo all they want to, but at the end of the day, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, and Caleb Plant, they were all decent A-grade fighters, at least on the A- level. Now, I've had certain people say, well, I believe that Jamal Charlo, David Benavidez, and Demetrius Bouboundre, that they're bigger threats, and you can have that opinion if you want to. Personally, in my opinion, I think that Caleb Plant, I think that Demetrius Andrade, I think that David Benavidez, possibly even Callum Smith, I think they're all bigger threats to Canelo than what Jamal Charlo is. At least overall, Caleb Plant and even Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders brings more to the table to threaten Canelo, in my opinion, than what Jamal Charlo does. I've seen Jamal Charlo a lot. I've never really been thoroughly impressed with him, at least when you compare him to the elite of the elite. I thought that he was very lucky to escape with the decision over Matt Korobov. I thought he looked very poor. I also did not think that he put on the best performance over Juan Macias Montiel. I think his footwork is a little bit off. I think overall that he's a little bit too stiff, and I don't think that he throws enough in certain fights when he needs to. I don't really think that he has a realistic chance over Canelo Alvarez. Doesn't mean that the fight shouldn't happen. Doesn't mean that the fight shouldn't happen. But when it comes down to it, when you're talking about, well, Jamal Charlo is in a completely different class, actually, no, he's not. Jamal Charlo is not in a completely different class from Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Platt. And actually, if we're really going to go there, if you take those two fighters at their best, they both probably beat Jamal Charlo. If we're really going to be real. It just is what it is. Because Jamal Charlo doesn't really do well with slick fighters either. But it is what it is. Now, if you talk about Demetrius Bouboundre, I would say that Andrade is probably about a level above Jamal Charlo. I would say that Andrade is about the same level as Caleb Plant, maybe a bit above, if you wanted to argue that. In terms of David Benavidez, yes, David Benavidez is probably the biggest threat out of all three of them, at least debatably, because he's pretty much a natural light heavyweight. So you certainly can make that case, but I believe, once again, that Canelo will get to that fight, but I think eventually, overall, or I think at the moment, that he's facing that light heavyweight, because I think it's very obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that he wants to try to make his greatest of all time case. And with that, he's going to try to beat that of the light heavyweights, and he may even possibly try to make a run at cruiserweight. That's why he tried to get that Ilunga Makabu fight. And so many of those guys were pissed off when Canelo Alvarez was trying to do that, because they knew what that meant. And they were like, oh, why doesn't he fight Alexander Usyk? Why doesn't he fight the top of the top? Dude, Canelo Alvarez is a natural middleweight. Like, Canelo Alvarez is a guy that is 5'9" with a 71-inch reach. And these guys want him to go in there in the ring against Alexander Usyk. That would be like asking Terrence Bud Crawford to face someone overall at middleweight like that of a Gennady Triple G Golovkin or a Danny Jacobs. Except Danny Jacobs is not even on the same level as an Alexander Usyk. Usyk is debatably the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. So what does that truly say about what they truly believe about Canelo Alvarez?
They're going to say whatever, and per usual,
because once again, allegedly for Andrade and David Benavidez and a lot of these other fighters being greater than Canelo Alvarez, don't you guys ever notice that those guys never have to face Dmitry Bivol or Alexander Usyk or any of those other guys? Isn't that particularly interesting? For Dante's Boxing Nation and all these other guys saying, you know what, Canelo Alvarez, he hands down loses all those fights. When do we ever hear, you know what, Jamal Charlo, let's hear you get in the ring with Dmitry Bivol. Let's see you get in the ring overall with David Benavidez. Now, some people have been calling for that fight, but that's because Jamal Charlo was stupid enough overall to talk shit about him. And now overall that his chickens came home to roost when it came down to it, he knows damn well that he doesn't want to take that fight. But when do we ever hear that, you know what, Andre, you know what, Charlo, we need to see you get in the ring with Dimitri Bivol? Now, once again, this is not me arguing that the fight should not happen. People get confused. But what this is me arguing overall is that for allegedly these guys claiming that Charlo and Andre and overall David Benavidez, that these guys are so above Canelo Alvarez, why are you asking Canelo Alvarez to possibly fight Alexander Usyk and Dimitri Bivol in order to beat a beef, but we don't ever hear overall that Andre and Jamal Charlo ever have to face or to beat a beef or Alexander Usyk? It was just saying, someone actually had a great comment in my comment section the other day about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Canelo Alvarez, that Canelo, at least with these channels, that he gets somewhat of the same treatment. And I would agree, not 100% of the same treatment, but whenever you have the number one pound for pound fighter, they're always going to get the quote unquote Floyd Mayweather treatment. And it's not really even just in boxing, it happens basically in every league. Patrick Mahomes is going to get a little bit of that treatment in NFL football right now because he pretty much is unanimously, in my opinion, the best football player in the world, at least American football player. When you talk about soccer, I mean, right now it might be Kylian Mbappe, but formerly, of course, Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, in my opinion, Messi. Just is what it is. When you talk about basketball, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, all those guys, someone get that treatment. To where basically no matter what that guy can do, it's never enough. Because the real problem that person has is not overall that allegedly they're doing all these bad things. It's really just that they don't want them at number one. But anyway,
To defend.
that's why when Mayweather was at top, you had certain guys claiming, well, you know what? Why doesn't he fight Gennady Golovkin? Even though Gennady Golovkin rehydrates at 170 pounds and Floyd Mayweather Jr. rehydrates at about 150 pounds max, why doesn't he fight Gennady Golovkin? Why doesn't he fight Sergio Martinez? Why doesn't he fight these guys? Is the same thing here. But anyway,
Bogus moves from Canelo.
and that's not me saying that Canelo gets the same hate as a Floyd Mayweather Jr. does. When it comes down to it, that's not me claiming that. But once again, whenever you have a person that's at the top of their game, I see it everywhere. They're always going to get that treatment. Djokovic and that of tennis, Canelo Alvarez and whoever's on top, basically, in that of boxing, whether it be Terrence Crawford or Fury or Usyk or Spence, they're always going to get that level of treatment. Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady in football, when it comes down to it, LeBron James, Steph Curry in basketball. Well, LeBron James, let me say this, he also gets his ass kissed a lot by the media. So even though there's certain people overall that expect way too much of him, there's also a lot of people that have lowered their expectations because they know that usually he's not going to win the championship. But anyway, same with Aaron Rodgers.
Avni Yildirim. And it's funny to me when you have to stretch the truth or stretch yourself to make it look like you're in line with.
And people try to always compare Avni Yildirim, or Yildirim, however you pronounce his name, and Rocky Fielding with these other fighters. Whenever I get a comment in my comment section, I always say, oh, Caleb Plant this. Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, and Billy Joe Saunders, they're not Avni Yildirims. they're not Rocky Fieldings. Rocky Fieldings and Avni Yildirims, those guys are C-grade fighters. What Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Caleb Plant were is that they were relative A-grade fighters. They were on the A- level, whether people want to admit it or not, on the same level as Jamal Charlo. And Caleb Plant, in my opinion, around the same level as Demetrius Bubo Andre. Period. Point blank.
The decisions of a fighter or a person that you like, knowing damn well this is not the fight that you would have preferred to see or the number one fight on your list.
Oh, you mean like how you do with Javante Tank Davis on the daily? You mean to tell me that it's okay for Javante Tank Davis to fight guys like Hector Garcia and Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Mario Barris and all these other guys? People mainly who have never won a legitimate belt before. Apparently, those are big, big fights, and people are just hating when they commentate on that. But for Canelo Alvarez, he just apparently fights shit fights. Like, come on.
I don't know any American fans.
And don't get me wrong, I do not think that the Gennady Golovkin trilogy overall was a great fight. I thought it was very clear Gennady was a shell of himself. But I think the reason why that fight happened once again is to have a little bit of closure with that to get them both a great amount of money. And I think the Zone was hoping for a great amount of money for that matchup. I don't really know how successful it was. I think it was decently successful, but I do not believe, of course, that it was a great last fight, but it wasn't expected to be.
And a lot of Canelo's fans that are radical and a lot of the ones that are racist actually are from America, right? So it's just ironic to see that you have these American racist Canelo fans who are somehow in favor of Canelo fighting all these British fighters, and it's not even a fight. Like, they don't even know who John Ryder is. So Eddie Hearn keeps saying that Canelo really, really wants to avenge the loss to Dimitri Bivol. I call BS on that. Here's why. Because one, Canelo being in his position and having the stature that he has, he could fight anybody. So he could have done an immediate rematch, which is the same thing that black fighters frequently have to do when they have any level of controversy.
And I don't necessarily disagree with that point all the way. I think once again that Eagle brings up a very good point about certain black fighters being held to a different standard and overall somewhat to a higher standard. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but the problem is that a lot of these guys they wanted Canelo Alvarez to go in there with Dimitri Bivol immediately. And that's not always what an intelligent fighter does. See, what people don't understand, and this is why Deontay Wilder ended up getting his ass kicked pretty much in the same fashion or in a worse fashion overall in the trilogy, because they wanted revenge for Deontay Wilder so bad that they weren't thinking. The truth is that if you get your ass kicked by a fighter the way that Wilder did against Fury, or by the way that Canelo Alvarez most recently did against Dimitri Bivol, an immediate rematch is not going to help you. You need to overall, once again, get in your groove. You overall need to take a couple of tune-up fights and say, okay, these are the adjustments that I can make. This is what I did right. This is what I did wrong. This is what I can do. Because you need to somewhat become a little bit more of a different fighter. You can't just go into an immediate rematch. Now, some people do. But in my opinion, that's not the most intelligent thing to do. But the reason why they want Canelo Alvarez to go into an immediate rematch is because they just basically want to see him lose once again.
In terms of a win over an opponent, a difficult fight, and or a loss. Guys like Sugar Ray Leonard versus Roberto Duran. Guys like Mayweather versus Castillo. Mayweather versus...
Right, once again, but the Roberto Duran versus Sugar Ray Leonard fight, that's a bad example because Sugar Ray Leonard lost that fight. You have more of a point if you're talking about certain black fighters when they win a rematch and they have to rematch them even though more than likely it may not call for it. Like Gervonta Tank Davis versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz. That's something overall to where you can have a little bit of that. That's something to where it's viable when it comes down to it. But the Sugar Ray Leonard versus Roberto Duran match, that doesn't really make sense for your point because Sugar Ray Leonard lost that fight.
Maidana. Guys more recently like Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo had to do an immediate rematch. Brian Castano.
Yes, he had to do an immediate rematch because he ended up pretty much having a draw in that fight. And usually when you have a draw, especially in a 50-50 fight, it more than likely is going to occur that there is a rematch. Just like with Canelo and Gennady Golovkin, and just like with a certain amount of other fights. Doesn't mean it's always happened, but usually it does, especially overall when it comes down to it in that of big fights. That's just common sense.
Andre Ward and Kovalev. These are all examples
That's a better example.
Immediate rematches. But when it comes to Canelo, he had the opportunity, being in his position, to immediately, he had a rematch clause. Why would you write a rematch clause into the contract if you weren't going to exercise it even though you lost? Doesn't really make sense. But he chose not to. He fought Golovkin the third time in a...
Right, once again, a lot of people bring up this point to me as well. And they always say, well, if Canelo truly planned overall to do this, why overall would he not, do his rematch clause immediately? Once again, because what intelligent fighters do, especially when they lose a certain fight, they say, you know what, I got to adapt a bit better. I got to become overall a little bit of a new fighter. I got to overall adapt to a certain amount of things. I got to get my groove back. They don't just head into the rematch immediately and get beat up in the same way. That's the exact same reason why Deontay Wilder and AJ Anthony Joshua, why they most recently lost their fights. Especially in the fashion that they did. Now, in my opinion, AJ would have never beat Usyk anyway, and I don't think Wilder would have ever beat Fury anyway either. They're just too limited with their skill sets, and they're too long in the tooth. They're too far into their career. But it would have helped.
Miserable, abysmal fight, as I predicted. Now they're talking about him fighting John Ryder, Mexico or UK. My solution, Anthony Yarde. Anthony Yarde, in his loss to Beterbiev, has shown an immense set of... He has set pretty much a standard that he's a warrior and he has a pair, right? And even though he's coming off of a loss, to me, if Canelo, I don't care what Eddie Hearn's saying because that's his bromance or whatever, so he's just going to say whatever and wants to stay on Canelo's good side. Me,
No shit, because he's his promoter. What kind of a fucking idiot says that? I'm not trusting Eddie Hearn overall because he has this bromance with Canelo Alvarez. Dude, he's his fucking promoter. He's supposed to say anything overall to make Canelo Alvarez look good. And if you have an overall ounce of intelligence, you know overall that Canelo Alvarez, once again, he's not a natural light heavyweight. And if you're from the promoter's side, you don't want someone like a Canelo Alvarez, who's mainly your cash cow. You don't want him possibly facing someone like that of an Anthony Yarde, because Anthony Yarde is a dangerous fight. He's decently bigger than Canelo. He's a great athlete. And if he loses to Anthony Yarde, that pretty much terminates the Dimitri Bivol rematch, which terminates his money. Okay? So Eddie Hearn is not going to do that.
I'm going to give you fair and objective points. And if Canelo really wanted to prove to the world that he was interested in being the best, and if he wanted to prove to the world that he really wanted a Bivol fight, wouldn't you take a better preparatory fight for a Bivol rematch, which would clearly be a guy like Anthony Yarde? Yarde fought Kovalev in Russia, so why wouldn't he fight Canelo in Mexico? He showed that he's a road warrior. And he fought.
I somewhat get what your point is overall, Mr. Ego, and I don't think that is the worst point in the world, but once again, that's just not going to happen. Canelo Alvarez, and I think both Eddie Hearn and Canelo Alvarez know that Canelo, that, either A, he's going to be successful in the Dimitri Bivol rematch, but even if he is, his days are going to be somewhat numbered at light heavyweight, because Canelo is not a natural light heavyweight. He just isn't, and he can't gain much more muscle mass because he doesn't really have that great of stamina. He does not have an elite gas tank. He was not gifted with it. He never was. It just is what it is. So that means the more muscle mass that he puts on, sure, the more powerful he can be, but overall his stamina is going to be horrible. And that's why in that match against Dimitri Bivol, I thought Canelo looked so limited because his gas tank was completely gone after round 4. It never showed up again.
A very dangerous 100% knockout artist in Better Biev, and he fought him in the UK and had a great showing. You know, some people, I think 2 of the judges had him up on the scorecard, yada yada yada.
Yes, which was a horrible scorecard. I bet Eagle had Anthony Yarde up in that fight. knowing him and Aki TV and Dante's scoring, they probably had Anthony Yarde up in that fight. Boxing Eagle probably took a look at those scorecards and said, I don't see a problem.
But Canelo is not really interested in being the best, and that's why my prediction is coming true.
Yes, he's not interested in being the best, even though he fights undefeated champion after undefeated champion after undefeated champion. Now, once again, his last 2 fights against Gennady Golovkin, and if he does face this John Ryder, of course, those are not undefeated champions. But once again, you must understand that this is in a different context. Once again, Canelo Alvarez is more than likely prepping for that of the Dimitri Bivol fight. You can't just take a look overall at someone when they're taking certain fights and say, oh, well, they just clearly don't want the Dimitri Bivol rematch. Canelo Alvarez more than likely is prepping. Now, once again, if he doesn't take the Dimitri Bivol rematch overall after that of the John Ryder fight, then it's understandable. Then he deserves criticism, at least if he's not going to face that at David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Or possibly someone who's very good at light heavyweight like that of an Artur Beterbiev, or who the hell else knows. I don't think, in my personal opinion, that any other fight would really be acceptable other than the Dimitri Bivol fight or a Beterbiev fight because of Canelo Alvarez's stature in terms of the boxing world, in terms of his popularity, but we'll see what happens.
Said this before the Bivol fight, the Canelo era is coming to a close, and there's just too.
Well, you're hoping that it comes to a close, and it certainly could come to a close. We don't really know what's going to happen. If Canelo Alvarez loses to Dimitri Bivol and then he ends up losing to Charlo or Andrade or David Benavidez, it's very likely that the Canelo Alvarez era, at least in terms of him being the main face of boxing, that it certainly could come to a close. But these guys have been saying that about Canelo Alvarez for the past several years, and at one point in time, I believed that as well because I did not think that Canelo was going to get past Gennady Triple G Golovkin. But what Canelo has showed me is that he is an extraordinary talent and that he is an extraordinary fighter.
Young stars and people who are doing it right and foregoing the BS that people are going to grow tired of it. Like John Ryder really serves no purpose. And again, if you wanted a Bivol fight, why wouldn't you want to? You lost him bad. Why not really prepare yourself? So it's not even just like doing it for.
He is preparing himself, but preparing himself overall by facing a guy that more than likely overall would have a decent chance to beat him once again because Canelo Alvarez is not really a natural light heavyweight. And some people may say, well, are you saying that Canelo is not as good as what you're claiming because you're claiming that Anthony Yarde may potentially beat him? There's a possibility that a lot of the top light heavyweights, at least overall, if they're decent athletes and if they're somewhat decently skilled, that they could potentially beat Canelo Alvarez because, once again, Canelo is a dude that's 5'9" with a 70-inch reach. He is not a light heavyweight, and really, I'm not really even quite sure if he's a natural super middleweight. A lot of those guys are bigger than him. Callum Smith and Caleb Plant and some of the other guys that he fought, Danny Jacobs, all those guys were bigger than him. They were lengthier than him. They were taller than him. It just is what it is. Now, of course, Canelo balloons up in weight a bit when it comes down to it, but at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, once again, he is not someone overall that is super huge, especially for the light heavyweight division. He's very much pushing his limits.
Fans is doing it for yourself. You know, can you expect if a team has a tough schedule and then they get to the finals, right? And then they get blown out, it's because they're in a weak conference and they didn't have the great preparation. But if you're in
You must be talking about LeBron James.
a division or a conference in the sport and it happens to be the harder one, then by the time you get ready for the big game, you know, the World Series, the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals or whatever, you're truly prepared for it because you had to play some damn good teams on the way up to get to that spot, to get to the World Series, right? Versus some conferences and divisions, they're very lackluster, so you have to beat okay or bad teams to get there. So from the point of
AKA LeBron James. And no offense against LeBron. LeBron James is an all-time great player, but there's a reason why he made 10 finals and lost 6 of them. Anyway.
a fighter, it would behoove Canelo to fight a guy like Anthony Yarde because even though he's coming off a loss, he's going to give you some good rounds if you can beat him. He may beat you or, you know, we'd have to see it. And it's just...
And there it is overall once again. Mr. Ego is just really hoping that Canelo Alvarez, that he gets beat. Here's my point. If Gervonta Tank Davis goes up to 140 pounds, a division that he really has never been at before, at least against a guy of, let's say, he were to face Josh Taylor, because that's really the only way that this could be comparable. If we were going to compare with Gervonta Tank Davis, if he does lose very badly to Josh Taylor, you can't throw him in there against someone overall who's still one of the top prospects of that at 140 pounds, because it's very clear that Gervonta Tank Davis, after his most recent performance, that he's a bit limited at 140 pounds. At least let's just talk about, you know, once again, if he were to lose to Josh Taylor dominantly. Because Canelo Alvarez, once again, he's not a natural light heavyweight. So really a lot of this is based on overall, hopefully, that Canelo can beat him.
better preparation for a Bevo fight. But Canelo doesn't really truly want to do that. He wants to keep milking DAZN and his fans. So it is what it is. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. And I'm out. Best in the business. Introducing.
But anyways, that's really about it. I don't think that all the points that Mr. Boxing Ego brought up were bad. I just don't think that it's good business, and I don't think that it's going to happen. And Canelo Alvarez, once again, Eddie Hearn is not going to put him in there with a light heavyweight that could potentially beat him right before a colossal rematch could happen with Dimitri Bivol. I think really the only reason why this John Ryder fight is happening, not only to defend a mandatory, but also for Canelo Alvarez overall, once again, to prepare and get back in the groove for the Dimitri Bivol rematch. And Canelo is going to have to be much sharper, and he's going to have to be much better. And his gas tank is especially going to have to be much better in the Dimitri Bivol fight. And for Canelo to win that fight, he's going to have to show that he's not afraid of Dimitri Bivol, and that first fight did not really affect him anywhere near as much as possibly what it did. Canelo is going to have to not be afraid of Dimitri Bivol. He's going to have to be willing to exchange with him literally the whole time. He's going to have to literally move in and out overall with certain angles like he did with Danny Jacobs. He also is going to have to pressure him literally the whole time. Because if you engage with a boxing match in the middle of the ring with Dimitri Bivol, this is just my personal opinion. I don't really care who you are, unless maybe you're someone like an Andre Ward who has great all-around mid-range boxing ability and someone who's great in all ranges, and Canelo Alvarez is as well. But the problem is that Dimitri Bivol is decently bigger than him and a little bit more lengthier than him. So it's going to be very, very tough. Canelo Alvarez is fighting a guy that is bigger than him and someone that has probably, I'm not going to say maybe just as much high boxing IQ as him, because once again, the sizes are quite different. But a fighter that can compete with him in most categories, and they're both A-plus skilled boxers. It's very hard to win a fight like that, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.